What happens when a beloved Hollywood legend walks onto what should be a friendly late-night talk show, only to face an ambush of personal attacks and deliberate provocation? It only took 37 seconds of pure venom from the host before one of cinema's greatest actors decided he had heard enough and walked right off the stage, leaving behind a stunned studio audience and a host whose true colors had just been exposed for the entire world to see. The Late Night with Seth Meyers studio buzzed with its usual energy as the cameras rolled live across America. Seth sat behind his polished desk, that familiar smirk already playing across his face as he prepared to introduce his next guest. The audience had no idea they were about to witness television history in the making, the kind of moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the legendary Mel Gibson," Seth announced with what seemed like enthusiasm, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. The crowd erupted in genuine applause as Mel walked out, waving graciously to the audience with that warm smile that had charmed moviegoers for decades. He looked relaxed in his tailored jacket, completely unaware of what Seth had planned for him. Mel settled into the guest chair, adjusting his posture as he prepared for what he assumed would be a typical promotional interview. "Great to be here, Seth," he said warmly, his voice carrying that distinctive accent that audiences loved. "Thanks for having me on the show." Seth leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "Oh, the pleasure is all mine, Mel. Really. I mean, it's not every day we get someone with such a, shall we say, colorful past." The audience stirred slightly, sensing something off in the host's delivery. Mel's eyebrows raised slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, I've had a long career, if that's what you mean. Lots of great projects. Wonderful people I've worked with." Right, Seth nodded, that smirk growing more pronounced. "Wonderful people. That's interesting phrasing." He shuffled his cards dramatically, clearly building to something. "Because I have to ask, and our audience is probably wondering too, how do you define wonderful people exactly?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Mel shifted in his seat, clearly confused by the hostile undertone. "I'm sorry, I don't follow. Wonderful people are, well, wonderful people. Talented actors, dedicated crew members, passionate filmmakers." Seth let out a small laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Passionate filmmakers. Sure, but what about passionate filmmakers who maybe don't fit into your particular worldview?" You know what I'm getting at here. The studio audience began to murmur uncomfortably. This wasn't the lighthearted banter they expected from a late-night show. Mel's face hardened slightly as he realized this wasn't going to be the pleasant interview he had prepared for. "Seth, I came here tonight to talk about my new film, not to get into some kind of political discussion," Mel said firmly but politely. "Maybe we could focus on the work?" But Seth was just getting started. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a more aggressive edge. "Oh, but the work is exactly what I want to talk about. See, I find it fascinating how someone can make these big-budget movies about redemption and heroism when their own personal views are so, let's call them traditional." "Traditional?" Mel repeated, his voice rising slightly. "What exactly are you trying to say here?" Seth spread his hands in mock innocence. "I'm not trying to say anything, Mel. I'm asking directly. In this day and age, with everything that's happening in our society, don't you think it's a little tone-deaf to keep making movies that glorify violence and outdated masculine ideals?" The accusation hit like a slap. Mel sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. "Outdated masculine ideals? Are you serious right now? I make movies about complex characters facing impossible situations, about redemption, sacrifice, the human condition." "Right, the human condition." Seth nodded sarcastically. "But whose version of the human condition? Because from where I sit, it seems like your version is pretty limited in scope." The audience was now completely silent, sensing the tension that had descended over the studio like a dark cloud. This had gone far beyond typical late-night comedy, into something much more personal and nasty. Mel took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his professionalism despite the obvious provocation. "Look, Seth, I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've worked with people from every background, every belief system you can imagine. My movies speak for themselves." "Do they, though?" Seth pressed on relentlessly. "Because I look at your body of work and I see a pretty consistent pattern. Strong white male protagonist saving the day while everyone else kind of falls into the background. Don't you think that's a little problematic in today's world?" That was the moment something shifted in Mel's expression. The polite smile disappeared completely, replaced by a look of genuine anger and disbelief. "Problematic? You're calling my life's work problematic?" Seth shrugged with infuriating casualness. I'm just saying what a lot of people are thinking. Maybe it's time for some self-reflection about whether your movies are really serving the greater good anymore. The words hung in the air like poison. Mel stared at Seth for a long moment, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the cameras. You know what? Mel said slowly, his voice dangerously calm. I think I understand what's happening here. You brought me on this show not to have a conversation, but to ambush me with your personal agenda. Seth's smirk faltered slightly, but he pressed on. Personal agenda? I'm just asking the questions that need to be asked. Isn't that what journalism is about? Journalism? Mel let out a bitter laugh. Is that what you call this? Sitting there with your smug little grin, throwing around accusations disguised as questions? This isn't journalism, Seth. This is a hit job. Seth's face flushed red at the accusation, but instead of backing down, he doubled down on his attack. A hit job? Really, Mel? Just because I'm asking you to be accountable for your choices doesn't make this a hit job. Maybe you're just not used to being challenged anymore. The condescension in Seth's voice was unmistakable now. Mel leaned forward, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. Challenged? You call this being challenged? You invited me here under false pretenses to attack my character and my work on national television. I invited you here to have an honest conversation, Seth shot back, his voice rising. Something Hollywood seems incapable of these days. Everyone's so worried about being politically correct that nobody wants to address the real issues. The real issues? Mel repeated incredulously. And what exactly are the real issues, Seth? Please, enlighten me and your audience about these pressing concerns. Seth gestured dramatically, playing to the cameras. The real issue is that we have influential people like you making movies that perpetuate harmful stereotypes while hiding behind the excuse of entertainment. Don't you think you have a responsibility to do better? The audience shifted uncomfortably. Many had come expecting laughs and celebrity stories, not this hostile interrogation. Mel's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You want to talk about responsibility? Let's talk about responsibility. What's your responsibility as a host? Is it to ambush your guests? To make them uncomfortable for your own entertainment? Seth waved dismissively. Oh, please, you're a public figure, Mel. You put yourself out there. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. A few tough questions? Mel's voice cracked with disbelief. You've been attacking me personally from the moment I sat down. You've questioned my integrity, my work, my character. And you call that a few tough questions? The host leaned back smugly. I call it holding people accountable, something that happens far too rarely in your world of privilege and enablers. That word, enablers, hit Mel like a physical blow. His knuckles went white as he gripped the chair arms. Enablers? You think everyone who works with me is an enabler? The hundreds of talented people, the crews, the actors, the writers? They're all just enablers in your worldview? Seth shrugged with infuriating nonchalance. If the shoe fits? I mean, when someone consistently makes choices that push certain narratives, and people keep working with them without questioning those choices, what else would you call it? I'd call it collaboration, Mel said through gritted teeth. I'd call it artistic vision. I'd call it the creative process that has entertained millions of people around the world. Entertained? Sure, Seth nodded mockingly. But at what cost? How many people have been marginalized by the stories you choose to tell? How many voices have been silenced so yours could be heard louder? The questions were coming like machine gun fire now, each one designed to wound and provoke. Mel stood up abruptly from his chair, towering over the desk. The audience gasped at the sudden movement. Voices silenced? Mel's voice boomed across the studio. I've given opportunities to countless people throughout my career. I've mentored young filmmakers, supported emerging talent, created jobs for thousands of people. What have you done, Seth? Besides sit behind this desk and tear people down? Seth's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. He was getting the reaction he wanted. What I've done is create a platform where important conversations can happen, where people like you can be called out for the impact of your actions. Called out? Mel repeated, his voice shaking with rage. This isn't calling someone out. This is character assassination disguised as social justice. You're using your platform to destroy people for your own twisted entertainment. The host laughed coldly. Destroy people? Come on, Mel. You're being a little dramatic, don't you think? I'm just asking you to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, some of your creative choices haven't aged well. My creative choices? Mel slammed his hand down on the desk, causing Seth to jump slightly. My creative choices have told stories of courage, sacrifice, redemption, and the triumph of the human spirit. What stories are you telling, Seth? What legacy are you building with this poison you're spreading? Seth recovered his composure quickly, that smirk returning. I'm building a legacy of truth-telling, of not letting powerful people hide behind their fame and fortune while they perpetuate harmful ideas. Harmful ideas? Mel's voice rose to a roar. What harmful ideas? That good can triumph over evil? That people can change and find redemption? That sacrifice means something? These are the harmful ideas you're so concerned about? Don't twist my words, Seth snapped, his mask slipping further. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The way your movies glorify violence as a solution. The way they present a very narrow view of what heroism looks like. Mel stepped closer to the desk, his presence dominating the small space. My movies show flawed human beings struggling with impossible choices. They show the cost of violence, not the glory of it, but apparently nuance is lost on someone who sees the world in such black and white terms. Nuance? Seth scoffed. That's rich, coming from someone whose idea of nuance is which weapon the hero uses to solve his problems. The insult was too much. Mel's face went completely still, a deadly calm replacing the anger. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with menace. You know what, Seth? I've heard enough. I came here in good faith to talk about my work, and instead I've been subjected to this pathetic excuse for an interview. Seth sensed he was losing control of the situation but couldn't help himself from pushing further. Oh, so now you're going to run away? Classic response from someone who can't defend their positions. Run away? Mel's laugh was bitter and cold. I'm not running from anything. I'm walking away from a host who has completely abandoned any pretense of professionalism or respect. Seth's desperation was showing now, his voice taking on a shrill quality as he realized his guest was slipping away. Walking away? Really? This is how the great Mel Gibson handles criticism? By throwing a tantrum and storming off? The word tantrum was the final straw. Mel turned back towards Seth, his eyes burning with righteous fury. A tantrum? You call this a tantrum? Let me tell you what a tantrum looks like, Seth. A tantrum is what you've been throwing for the last 10 minutes. Attacking a guest on your own show like a spoiled child who didn't get his way. The audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the raw confrontation unfolding before them. Seth tried to regain his composure, but sweat was beading on his forehead. I'm not attacking anyone. I'm doing my job as a journalist. Journalist? Mel's voice dripped with contempt. You're not a journalist, Seth. You're an entertainer who's forgotten the difference between comedy and cruelty. A real journalist asks questions to inform their audience, not to humiliate their guests. Seth's face was turning a deeper shade of red. Don't lecture me about journalism. I've been doing this longer than you think. I know what questions need to be asked. No, you don't, Mel shot back immediately. You don't have the first clue about real journalism. Real journalists research their subjects, ask thoughtful questions, and treat their guests with basic human decency. You've done none of those things tonight. The host was floundering now, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in real time. I did my research. I know all about your past, your controversies, your problems. My problems? Mel stepped closer to the desk again. The only problem I see here is sitting behind that desk, hiding behind a microphone and thinking that gives him the right to destroy people for sport. Seth tried one last desperate attack. Oh, so now I'm destroying you? Poor Mel Gibson, the victim. How does it feel to be on the receiving end for once? The cruelty in those words shocked even the hardened television crew. Mel stared at Seth for a long moment, his expression shifting from anger to something closer to pity. You know what, Seth? I actually feel sorry for you. Sorry for me? Seth laughed, but it sounded forced and hollow. Yes, sorry for you, Mel continued, his voice growing calmer but more devastating. Because this is who you really are. This isn't an act for the cameras. This is the real Seth Meyers. A bitter, small man who gets his kicks from tearing down people who've accomplished more than he ever will. Seth's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The brutal honesty of Mel's words had cut deeper than any shouting match could have. You can't just say that. I just did say it, Mel replied simply. And everyone in this studio, everyone watching at home, they can see it too. They can see exactly what kind of person you are when you think you have all the power. The host was completely rattled now, his composure shattered. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've been through, what I've had to do to get here. What you've had to do? Mel's voice rose again. What you've had to do is destroy other people's reputations to build your own. What you've had to do is attack guests on your own show to make yourself feel important. That's what you've had to do, Seth. Seth tried to rally, to find some way back into control. I'm not destroying anyone. I'm holding people accountable for their actions and their influence. No, Mel said firmly, shaking his head. You're not holding anyone accountable. You're settling scores. You're punishing people for being successful, for having the courage to create something meaningful while you sit on the sidelines and criticize. The truth of it hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Seth's hands were shaking now as he shuffled through his cards, looking for some escape, some way to salvage the situation. I create something meaningful every night. This show matters. These conversations matter. This conversation matters? Mel gestured around the studio. This ambush matters? This character assassination matters? The only thing this conversation has accomplished is showing your audience who you really are when the mask comes off. Seth made one final desperate attempt to turn the tables. At least I'm not running away from the hard questions like you are right now. Mel smiled then, a cold, knowing smile that chilled everyone watching. Running away? Seth, I'm not running from anything. I'm making a choice. I'm choosing not to participate in your toxic little game anymore. He reached up and began removing his microphone, the small gesture somehow more powerful than any dramatic storm-off would have been. I'm choosing not to give you any more ammunition for your campaign of destruction. Seth watched in horror as his guest systematically disconnected himself from the show's audio system. Wait, you can't just leave. We're in the middle of an interview. No, we're not, Mel said calmly, placing the microphone on the chair. We stopped having an interview the moment you decided to attack me instead of talking to me. What we've been having is something much uglier than that. The host was panicking now, realizing that his show was falling apart on live television. Mel, come on. Let's just reset. We can start over. Talk about your movie. But Mel was already walking toward the edge of the stage. He turned back one final time, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned studio, without any amplification. You want to know what's really problematic, Seth? It's using your platform to spread hatred and division while pretending it's justice. It's attacking people's life work because you're jealous of what they've accomplished. Seth's voice cracked as he made one last plea. Don't do this. Don't walk out. Think about how this looks. Mel paused at the edge of the stage, looking back at the broken man behind the desk. How this looks? It looks like someone finally had the courage to stand up to a bully. It looks like someone refused to be part of your sick entertainment. And with that, Mel Gibson walked off the Late Night with Seth Meyers stage, leaving behind a host whose true nature had been exposed for all the world to see, an audience sitting in stunned silence, and a moment of television that would be remembered not for its comedy, but for the raw display of one man's dignity triumphing over another's petty cruelty.